Hi, everybody. This is Dan Liebenson from Jewish Live. I'm back for another conversation about this year's Passover. A lot of people are expressing anxiety about Passover this year, not sure how to make the Seder meaningful, or a lot of people are saying something more along the lines of, it's not even a question of how to make the Seder meaningful, it's a question of how to just make it not sad and depressing, because we're not able to do it the way that we know how to do it, and we're not able to have the people around the table that we usually have. And we want to actually try to explore whether we can not have that be the question, how to make it less depressing, but actually how to make it really great. And at least maybe there are experiments that we can do this year that we weren't able to do before, or that we were able to but wouldn't have done before. So I've asked to be here with me today my friend and fellow thinker about these kinds of things, Rebecca Milder. She is the founding director of the Jewish Enrichment Center in Chicago, which is based in Chicago, but really an important national education organization that's really thinking in new ways about Jewish education for children and also for adults. And Rebecca, you're one of the most creative thinkers, not only about the specifics of your creative thinking, but just walking us through a way of thinking creatively about Jewish practices and Jewish ideas. So there's no one that I thought could be a more interesting person to brainstorm with a little bit and try to think about how we might make this year's Passover as meaningful as we can possibly make it. So thank you for being here and welcome.
My goodness, thank you so much, Dan. It's great to be talking with you.
So can you at least start getting us thinking a little bit? I mean, how are you thinking about Passover this year? I guess for your own family, but also as you've been talking with some of the families that send their children to the Jewish Enrichment Center, like what's been coming up and what are some of the ways that at least you've been trying to talk to people and framing things?
Yeah. You talked at the outset about how could make it less depressing than we're a little bit afraid that it might be. But I'm thinking of it in a different way. I'm thinking of the Seder this year more from all of the opportunities that we have, given the context that we're living in right now. And then when I begin to think about how we open up a Seder this year, I think about the preparation that we do. That, in fact, that preparation is with the same people that we're spending 24/7 with. It's the same people that we're with in the same space. It's the same 24 hours that we're given every day. And so how do we make that different? So what are the elements that we have to play with so that we can just at least start by setting the stage for something different to happen than what we may fear might happen or what's happened in every other year. So I guess that's, for me, the starting place is actually what do we do before the Seder to make things happen, to make things different.
And okay, so what are some examples? Well, give us some, what does that look like?
Yeah, right. So I mentioned, what are the elements that we have to play with? We have the space and the physical items that we have, right? You have the furniture that you have, but we can reset the furniture into different ways. Thinking about, well, what is it that you and your family want to be doing at the Seder? Like, in what way would you like to make it different? Are you hoping to tell the story, for example, like in a really cozy place? Are you hoping to make it so that the food is at the center of what you're doing at your Seder? But even just thinking about that or rearranging the furniture, even if you don't have an intention when you start rearranging the furniture, could bring up some of the ways that you might want to be experiencing Seder this year.
Mm-hmm. I mean, when you think about, I guess when I'm thinking about the Seder, like there's two kinds of people, I think, in the world. It's not a joke like that. There's two kinds of people in the world. One kind thinks there's two kinds of people in the world, and there's the other kind. But there's two kinds of people in the world that I think, in terms of Seders, right? There's, I think, a small group of people that are used to having a Seder where they're deeply exploring these important, deep issues about Passover and what it means to be a freed slave, et cetera, et cetera. And then I think there's a vast majority of people for whom Passover is more like a Thanksgiving meal with some songs and some, symbolic foods and stuff. And we read this Haggadah and we kind of get a little bit out of the story, but it's not like the story has really been at the center. It's that there's been this hour of reading that's been at the center, but it's not really clear what that's all about. And I think that a lot of the anxiety comes from the idea that, but that favorite part of Passover is now not going to happen. The Thanksgiving part, the part where we get together with friends and family and have a wonderful meal. So I guess my question is, how are you, what is, I mean, is that kind of what you're hearing, number one? And number two, it's kind of like, is there a way to, is the goal to try to figure out ways to make that still present in some Zoom call kind of way? Or are you thinking about it more as an opportunity to say, well, maybe let's emphasize the other parts of the Seder this year that are the things that we tend to not really do that deeply. And maybe this will be the first year that we really grapple with the meaning of the Passover story in the deepest way.
I guess I think of it not necessarily as an either or, that there are things that logistically we can't do. And I do think it's important to recognize those things that are going to be different and to mourn some of the differences, and then to figure out what is possible. And I'm not saying that every family is looking for a deep conversation. I guess what I'm offering is opening up the possibility that this night, this Passover night, could be different than the days that preceded it. Mm-hmm. That we could have a structured time together that feels different, where we're talking about something different, where we're doing something different. And it isn't going to be the same as what it was in another year. And if reading for an hour at the Seder table wasn't your thing anyway, then I think this is a fabulous time to see what might be your family's thing, whoever your family is, and whether that family is present in the room with you or on Zoom.
Right. So concretely, have you I guess one question, like, have you already thought this through? I haven't. I've been talking to people, but I think I'm going to be doing some work over the weekend to really think about what should actually happen. But so question number one, have you already come up with anything for your own family? But question number two is okay, so where would we start? What would be, especially right now we're talking about Passover, but you run a program where you're always thinking in new ways about Jewish practices and helping children do that. So I guess if we were using your methodologies, what would we do with the Seder? How would we go piece by piece? Okay, the first thing is the Kadesh. Let's think that through, and then what would we do with that? Or would we kind of start with some bigger principle?
Yeah, that's such a great question. For most things, I just tend to think that there's so many great ways of doing it. And so I've come up with an idea. And I think that there's a lot of ways that we could be doing it. So what I mentioned at the outset about preparing, I do think that that's where it starts. That as an educator, we know that we don't just launch into the heaviest part, and we don't just automatically expect people to show up differently just because it's 5 o'clock or the sun has gone down on Pesach evening. We get to do things together that help bring us all in to the Seder, into what the conversation or what the experience could be. And so I really think about that moment, and we could say that moment is Kadesh. That moment is the first moment of the Seder. And I like thinking about it as Kadesh, because Kadesh, that word means distinct or set apart, making this time different. Is that about deciding to wear different clothing? Is that about deciding to prepare a certain kind of food? We're going to go well, I don't know what my family's going to do. But maybe it's only finger foods, or it's only dipping foods, but it doesn't matter so much, right? We actually don't have to have anxiety over what the choices are, as long as they kind of make things different. Um, I think another way that you could set things up, because we have just about a week now before Pesach starts, is we could start noticing all of the things that bring joy, right? So every time that something gorgeous happens, like the sun was out this morning, write it down, stick it in a cup, and stick it in the Kiddush cup, and bring that Kiddush cup full of symbols and moments of joy to the Seder. And do the same for all these moments of narrowness, right? What are the things that just, my goodness, when we are almost exclusively with the same people day after day, there is a lot that's hard about that, and write it down and bring it to the Seder, because I think that that'll have some resonance. And not just the pain that is our personal pain, but the pain that we're experiencing on behalf of the whole world, on behalf of the earth. Like, bring it all, write it down and bring it all to the Seder.
And so, like, how does that work for children? Because I ask about children because I actually think that my experience with things that my daughter has done through your program is that, like, things that work for children tend to work for adults, and not necessarily the other direction. And I think that a lot of times when we have a Seder that's written sort of by and for adults who think that they know how children are, it doesn't go over all that well. I wonder if maybe this is an opportunity to do it in reverse, and not to do what is called, pediatric Judaism, which I think is some sort of dumbed down version of adult Judaism, but rather I guess we could call it child-centered Judaism in your parlance, that actually is a smartened up child version that potentially adults really, really love. And I think we all have a sense that, yeah, we tend to really love smart things that are done for children. So, like, how would a child, so what you're talking about with the Kiddush cup and the writing of the good and the bad, like, how would a child experience something like that? How might we think about, like, the other, right after the Kiddush comes the hand washing? Well, that seems pretty on the nose this year. And then the greens and dipping the greens in the salt water. Like, how do we potentially think of all those? And I think there's really two questions, right? One is that, or maybe three, right? One is that we're only here with our nuclear family, and we're used to having a greater number of people. Number two, to the extent that we're here with other people, they're on Zoom and they're kind of here. And how do we best include them all? And the third part is kind of like, well, how is this Passover different from all other Passovers? I mean, like, what, it's not just that we're not together, it's that there's something going on in the world. And how might we actually use something like this to maybe even help the children and help us register deeply what's going on in a way that maybe we haven't, because we've been kind of just shocked and just whipsawed around. And maybe having like a Passover, some kind of ceremony, allows us to even explore our true deep feelings about what we're experiencing right now. But, like, how would we actually do that?
Yeah, that's the question that I want us to push into. Because yes, when children are present, I do believe that having the child's voice be part of the process, be part of what's going on, is just extremely important. But through the act of listening to the children, we actually raise up the listening for all of us. And that's why I think that bringing the children in a robust way, to make their voice integral to what's going on, actually changes what's going on for all of us, because we've changed the structure, we've changed the power dynamics. And making that possible at a Seder is, I think, can be transformative. So I've been thinking a lot about this idea of what some of the early rabbis say. They talk about the Seder should go from disgrace to praise, or from like the hard stuff to liberation. And I think this idea of being of having the child's voice be integral actually gives us some clues to how we could make a Seder that goes from the hard stuff to the hopefulness in a way that also brings in the reality that we're living right now. I spoke already about the importance of setting the stage, both the physical stage, but then also ourselves, that there's got to be some way that whoever you're sitting with, whether that's on Zoom or in person, that we kind of like dip our toe into the water to make sure that sort of dealing with the hard stuff or opening up vulnerability is going to be okay. So after Kadesh, you could take karpas, you could take, one of the earlier parts of the Seder and not dive in wholly and expect that everyone's going to be with you, but do something small that opens up the safety and the connection between people and a little laughter, however it is that the people that you are with, like how you get together. Everything from taking the karpas and the parsley and if you're a family that likes to go kind of straight, karpas, a symbol of hope, of greenery, of belief that something else is possible. What is it that you wish? And it's almost like a karpas wish. What would you wish for? And to say it out loud. Something a little more active that sort of breaks the ice a little bit for families or for whoever you're with is take a look at the Seder Plate. All of those symbols mingled there together of the hope and the rebirth, but also the bitterness and the hardness. And get up and go find things in the house that relate to the symbol. So you're going to get up and go and look for something else for you that represents maror. And for you that represents beitza, the egg. And bring those all back to the table. And hopefully that would open up a conversation about, why did you choose what you chose? And what does it mean to you? And what are the different ways that we understand the symbols? Because then we can take some of these ideas over into into opening up the story, into Magid, which is it offers such riches, I think, for delving into what we're experiencing right now and what we might hope for the world coming out of this when we do come out.
It feels like, as you were describing that, the whole idea of going and bringing something that speaks to you, that struck me as something that could work over Zoom. It feels like Zoom is good at conversations. It's not so good at, it's obviously not very good at sensory things, right? It seems like the only real sense that you can activate through Zoom would be sound, maybe a little bit visual. I guess visual, but it seems, I'm not sure exactly how you would do that, in a sort of powerful way, because you're stuck in a little box. It feels like sound at least is as projected through Zoom more or less as it is if you're actually there, but every other sense is either absent or small. So how might we use sound in a different way? And maybe the classic way to use sound in the Seder is conversation. And I like the idea of bringing objects, and you can imagine, Uncle so-and-so bringing an object on Zoom and holding it up and saying, I brought my dirty socks because they remind me of the hard labor that I did today, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And that kind of gives, a much deeper sense of it. As opposed to, like, I think what I had in mind, which is like, everybody take out your bowl of salt water now, and everybody's like, and it's like somehow that feels not quite satisfying.
Yeah, I think another great way to use sound is for those of us who are already online, there's such great videos out there. So, and Zoom has a lot of functionality that we can actually use to our advantage at a Seder. So being able to all watch a video together about the 4 children, and to maybe before you start watching the video, can do a little comparison of, let's say you're in 3 or 4 different cities Zooming, and everybody writes into the chat button some ideas about how that family in the room understands the wise child or the wicked child, or right, so that you have some sense of like, how are we starting out understanding these. Then watch the video together. I think Bim Bam's is a great video about the 4 children that opens up this kind of conversation, and then see, what are the ways that at least the video portrayed each of the child's in a positive light and also in a negative light, which I think then, for families that are inclined to go this way, can open up a conversation about our own response to what's going on in the world, whatever aspect of that the family wants to pick up.
I would say one thing about sharing Zoom videos on that I learned is that when you share your screen to a video, there's a checkbox that comes up that's something like share sound. I don't know exactly what it says, but it says like share the sound through the computer or something. And if you don't check that box, then the video plays, but there's no sound. So make sure that you press share screen and then share the video, then select the video and then press that sound thing before you actually hit share.
Definitely. There's a little bit of technology figuring out before these Zoom Seders.
Right. And if everybody says they couldn't hear it, then you forgot to do that. So do it again.
Exactly.
So I mean, one question that I had about children in the Seder this year, because we had some great conversations earlier in the week with B'nai Lappi and with Sarah Hurwitz about the sort of more philosophical dimensions of the Seder and of the Exodus story. And they're confusing dimensions of it because the way that we generally tell the Exodus story in the Seder has these lines from Deuteronomy, and it's not necessarily the best way to tell the Exodus story. But if you actually go and you tell the Exodus story sort of from the book of Exodus, then you actually find a lot of elements of it that really map onto what we're going through pretty powerfully. There's the idea of the plague of the firstborn, and the idea that the Israelites were in their houses and hoping that the angel of death will pass over their houses, and that's pretty on the nose. And I guess my question is, how or to what extent do we want to talk with children about that at the Seder, versus to what extent do we want to make the Seder a place where they can be a little bit shielded, a little bit, a place of love and joy, where at least they don't have to be dealing with that fear, because they know what's going on the rest of the time. They understand it. A lot of children do, at least. And so I don't know, I'm like conflicted about, on the one hand, I'm excited to have that conversation because it seems like for the first time in my life, we might actually be going through something where the Passover story has this very deep resonance. And at the same time, like, I'm not quite sure that my children want to have that conversation. And they're going to be missing the lovely family aspect of the Seder. And in some ways, those two things are at odds, because and maybe that's why often many families don't really get into the depths of the Exodus story, because it does seem a little bit, well, that's kind of depressing. And this part where family's together, I mean, if you like your family, is pretty fun. So I don't want to be a downer. And this year it feels sort of maybe even more so.
Mm-hmm. A family needs to do what the family is needing. So I can't presume to know what a family needs. I do think that the Seder, you like to call it a technology. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the Seder technology, and if we think of part of the technology being an experience that takes us from the hard stuff to the better stuff,
Mm-hmm.
that if we don't get stuck only in the hard stuff and we also move through to the better stuff, to the hopefulness, to the what can we be doing, and what's my responsibility, and what do I now know that I didn't know before? and what might be the implications of that knowing,
Mm-hmm.
then the conversation with the children isn't only about the difficulty, right? If we're only thinking about the difficulty, then we haven't done the other part of the Seder. We haven't gotten to the Hallel. We haven't gotten to Elijah. And I think it's also important that when we're talking about children, it's important to take our cues from the children in terms of what hard stuff they want to know about. Right? So if a child isn't asking, and it depends on the age, but if a child isn't asking about a certain thing, it might be that they're not curious about it. That's not the information that they need.
So I mean, it's funny, like one thought that that's been on my mind over the last couple of days has been a little bit sort of identifying with the regular everyday Egyptians in the story, that that there are these plagues, and they started off kind of, you know, it's not great that the water turns to blood, but it's not as bad as the death of the firstborn. And you kind of wonder, like, what if your everyday Egyptian, by the time they got to like the fifth plague, would have been like, Pharaoh, like, let them go already, you know, like, please, you know, meaning that that they're mad at their political leader for not having saved them from this plague, you know, and something like that. I wonder if like there are ways, like I can imagine you usually, when my point is that not so much the politics of it, but my point is that when we do the 10 plagues in your typical Seder, you do them very quickly. You know, there's like plague, 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 you know, dip the finger in the wine, and then it's kind of over, as opposed to kind of thinking about each plague separate. Like I'm kind of imagining slowing that down and saying, let's talk about blood, like what it might have been like to have the plague of blood. Let's talk about frogs, you know, right? And again, like it makes me feel like that sort of feels a little bit like the slow roll of this plague that we're currently in. You know, it's like a month ago, 2 months ago, there was something bad happening in China, you know, and it's almost like the opposite of Dayenu, or maybe it is Dayenu. Like if only we had done something then, you know, and then there was a cruise ship, and if only we had done something then, you know, and I don't know, like if that raises something for you, and also like the journey piece of it, you know, that you've been talking about the journey from um, you know, the low to the high, and part of the problem right now is that we haven't gotten to the high yet. You know, but how do
Yeah.
we also like talk about that in terms of the hope that we will get there soon, and this happens to be in the middle of it as opposed to after it's all over.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying about the plagues is some of the depths of difficulty, and opening that up and looking empathetically and thinking creatively, telling the backstory, you know, an imagined backstory of what's going on from one plague to the next, and different people taking different perspectives. So somebody is Pharaoh, and somebody is an Israelite leader, and somebody is an Israelite slave, and somebody's a regular Egyptian, and somebody is different parts of the earth, right? And telling the backstory and getting inside the different perspectives is a very powerful way to build metaphors for what might be happening right now.
You know, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was thinking about, you know, another thing that came up for me as you were talking is you've got so many ideas, and so many people do, about what this story might mean in today's world. And there is a way that we could have Seder where the leader brings some of these ideas and we unpack them. And I'd be happy to offer lots of different ways that we could unpack them.
Yeah,
and
please.
I think there's a way that we could open up the story and explore the story as the people who are right here in the room, and find out what comes up for us, and therefore find out what this particular group of people feels drawn to unpacking, and what new metaphor, what new insight we might discover through being live and dynamic in the moment with the story or the text and the people in the room. And I think that is an opportunity we have because we are coming with such visceral knowledge this year,
Right.
that we may not have in other years.
Right. So when you say unpack, you mean sort of make meaning of? You mean sort of try to say, what do we think about this?
Yeah, I actually mean something pretty physical, right? I believe in using different modalities to explore a Jewish text, to explore a different idea. And here's another way that I think this is not just for children, but this is for all of us, that when we rely on the modality of conversation, we're really just, forgive me, speaking in, with just one way of speaking to each other. If we choose art, if we choose drama, something else, we actually use a different way of speaking with each other that unpacks more of what might be there. So, I understand that drama is not for everybody. So I'll start with something that's a little bit safer and something that children understand very, very well, is what we call at the Jewish Enrichment Center, building the story or building the text. Take that text, take the story, and this is 15 chapters of Exodus. It's pretty long. You don't have to do the whole thing. You can ask around the table, ask on Zoom, which section feels the most provocative to you. And maybe what you want this year is the moment of Miriam hiding in the bushes. Or maybe you want to unpack the moment of Moshe hitting the Egyptian taskmaster. And if, no matter where you are in whatever city, you can build that text, pull out that part of the story from a Bible, from a Chumash, review it, and then build it, and then start.
And just to make it clear to people, like, you mean physically build it with
I mean,
materials, Legos, whatever it may be.
Whatever is there. I don't know what you'll find around your house. You can, dump out the vase and take out the little pebbles at the bottom, or the natural materials that you have lying around. You could take out the children's train set if that's a helpful material. Literally build. And then the next section is to talk about it. So if building isn't the right thing, Dan, you mentioned sound earlier. I think sound is an incredibly powerful way to open up tight, difficult moments. So if you've prepared and all the people are ready to take this risk, try telling a part of the story just with sound, no words. So represent it through items you find in the house, through voices, but without words. And you can do that for each other on Zoom. You can also take your body and pose it into different ways that you think the characters in the story might be using their bodies. What might their faces be doing? Again, that's a great thing that you can even take a screenshot and then be able to look at the different ways that people have used their faces and bodies. And then again, to this piece of unpacking it, because I don't know what you would discover. But again, it would be something live for the people in the room, their encounter with the text, who they are this year. And some of the ways that you unpack that are, what are some of the differences and similarities that we're seeing, but also what other people did, what did that make you think? What did it make you feel or wonder about?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, like, as I'm listening to you talking, like, the first thought that crossed my mind was sort of So much of what you're talking about, you could do any Passover, like, right? You should do any Passover. And then I was thinking, like, but we don't. And it's occurred to me two things. One is that, in a way, necessity is the mother of invention. I mean, maybe because we're in this position where we kind of can't do things the way we usually do, it's an opportunity to try doing something that we probably should have done anyway. And number two is that in the design world, the world of design thinking, it's always said that a constraint is a good and important element in design. That if you can do anything, then it's hard to design something, because you're like, but why should I even bother, because I can do everything. If you say you can only do something that you can do with people who are on Zoom, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, then you might come up with something really quite creative and clever. And then it turns out, wait a second, we can do this every Passover, and then all of a sudden you've invented a new way to do Seder, which wasn't your original intent. And it feels to me that if people come into this with the right attitude, that that's very possible. And that I can imagine that, and that's kind of what I was trying to say a little bit at the beginning, that I have this feeling that we've been doing Seders not so well for a very long time. And maybe this is going to have the potential to jumpstart a process of actually figuring out a way to do Seders that work better in terms of the goals of Passover, the
Yeah.
traditional goals of Passover.
I think we have this moment of opening, right? Where there is more willingness and to try something a different way, because we can't do it the way that we did it last year.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to capitalize on that, to discover how we can get live for this hard stuff to beautiful stuff to hopefulness. And then to what do we take out?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. How does it not live? How does it not stay just at the Seder? And so, yes, I think that once we've unpacked this Magid, once we've unpacked this story, and maybe we've come back to the symbols that are sitting on the table, and maybe you've got your cup full of things that brought you joy in this past week, and your cup full of things that were really hard. And maybe you've got your new Seder symbols right there on the table, and you're starting to see through what you've put on the table, what you literally brought this year, what is beyond the table as true in our lives, and then therefore what we want to be different, right through the symbols.
There's something that you were talking about earlier that I want to sort of double down on and then explore with you, which is that I think a lot of people don't really know. And I think they don't know it for a couple of reasons. One is that they haven't been taught it. And second is that they haven't experienced it, which is this idea that the Seder in its structure is supposed to lead you from degradation to celebration, or from a low point to a high point. And so the structure of the Seder is that at the beginning, we eat the horseradish and the matzah, the bread of affliction, and we kind of, in a way, are and play acting this idea, or reenacting, or however you want to put it, remembering that we were slaves in Egypt. And then over the course of the Passover experience, we are freed from slavery, and then we have this celebratory part, and that's the part at the end with the Hallel prayer, which is a prayer of thanksgiving and a prayer of praise for God, and the fun songs that we sing at the end, but also the whole idea that Elijah comes, and Elijah is kind of a harbinger of the Messianic age, and there's all this kind of like really great stuff. Now, I think that, first of all, for whatever reason, a lot of people haven't been taught that this is supposed to be the structure of the Seder. And second of all, because largely people get to the meal and then they're done, and people start leaving, the celebratory stuff actually comes after the meal. So maybe we sing a couple of songs and then it's time to go, and to my mind, I've always said that that's kind of like somebody who's only heard the first half of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, and never heard the choral part. And the choral part is the release, is the celebration. And the first part is beautiful, but it's playing a different role. And if you have never heard the whole symphony, then you haven't really experienced what Beethoven was really trying to have you experience. So I guess I wonder if there's a way this year, partly because you don't have those antsy relatives leaving in the same way. I mean, maybe they're going to go off the Zoom. I don't know, but I don't think it's quite as kind of like once people start leaving the room, it's kind of a bummer. You know, it's like, oh, there's 6 of us left. We're going to really do this whole thing. We're going to do it quickly. But if it's just that they like turned off their Zoom, or maybe they could even keep their Zoom on and just we wouldn't even know that they're not participating. You know, they're just could be reading a book or something. You know, but there's an opportunity maybe to do that second part. And I know that you were saying earlier before we came on that you've had Elijah on your mind. So I'm curious if that is part of what's been on your mind, or if you could sort of talk about both the idea of that second part and Elijah, if they're two separate topics.
Oh yeah, yeah. You know, who's to say that we can't sing before we eat, right? Then maybe we could do the whole arc before we eat, then keep going after we eat. I think one of the things that's been on my mind about this celebration part afterwards is actually thinking of it less as celebration, less as, well, we're all free now and everything's great and let's celebrate. Because I'm not, you know, and I think that's part of the reality that we bring to the Seder this year is we're not through whatever that's going to mean. And we haven't internalized what is possible to know from what we're going through right now. We haven't taken it to changing our systems so that more people can be free and healthy. So I've been thinking about Eliyahu Hanavi. I've been thinking about this moment of Elijah, and I want to thank the many children with whom I've been exploring Elijah for the past like 12 weeks since the beginning of January. That in Jewish tradition, we often think of Eliyahu Hanavi as Elijah as this guy he's going to come and he's going to announce that the world is perfect. You know, here we are. We're arriving at the time. But instead, he's not really that guy. He's the guy who reminds us of our responsibility to make the world better. And I think we can actually find the kernel of this, more than the kernel. I think the early rabbis, they tell a story in the Talmud in Sanhedrin about it's Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, and he's talking to Eliyahu Hanavi, and he's saying, "Hey, you know, when is Mashiach going to come and make the world perfect?" And Eliyahu was like, "Well, just go ask him, right?" And then the story goes on, and Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi finds Mashiach, and he's at the city gates, and he's taking off his bandages one at a time, as opposed to the other lepers who are taking off all their bandages and at once, and then putting clean bandages. And Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says, "Hey, when are you going to come?" And Mashiach says, "Today." And Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi is very excited. He goes back to Eliyahu Hanavi, but Mashiach hasn't come, and he's really sad, and he says, "He lied to me." And Eliyahu's response is, "Yes, he said he was going to come today, but only if you would listen." And of course, the text goes on to say, "If you will listen to God," you know, and what God says. But I think perhaps more powerful to us in today's world is if you will listen, if you will find what's going on inside yourself and inside of other people, and what's going on with the planet, and that if this Eliyahu Hanavi is to come to our Seder, to every one of our Seders, and remind us about the possibility of listening to each other, then that is an incredibly powerful message that Eliyahu Hanavi is bringing to our Seder. And I think that's where the hopefulness can be, right? So if we've unpacked the story as the group, who we are right now, and then we ask, so what have we noticed? What do we now know that we didn't know before? Then what would Eliyahu have us do with that? What have we heard? What is now required of us as we walk out of this Seder? And I think that's where the hopefulness is. I think that's where the transformation has truly come, where it's not like a smug, oh, we're done and we did it and we're celebrating and someone did it for us, but coming from our responsibility and from our grappling with what is and what has been.
And it makes me think about the, when we typically get up and open the door for Elijah to come in, but in a way, I almost feel like the way you're describing it, it's like that opening the door, it's like when we're ready to go out. Now, granted, we're, what are we taking out? What are we going to do out there? Which I think is a sort of a beautiful reversal, but not a reversal, of that door opening part of the Seder.
And historically about opening the door, being related to some fears.
Right.
Right. And like, what fears are we now ready to open the door to? And just, things must be done. And will we walk out?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting about even the opening the doors, like sometimes, a lot of families will like sort of play a trick where somebody jumps out the window and dresses up with a beard and, and then when you open the door, the kids open the door and like actually Elijah walks in, it's kind of like now I was thinking about that, like you wouldn't do that this year because if some random person walked into your door, you would be very, very upset. But that's a problem. I mean, it has to be that way, but it's also a way that the world is this year, which is so deeply imperfect, right? I mean, I've been, my wife and I have been taking a walk every evening just to get some fresh air. And as you walk past people, I mean, it used to be that a lot of people, right, especially in a big city, would just walk past people and not even acknowledge them. And I always felt like I'm one of those people that just sort of says hello, just kind of acknowledges people as I'm walking past them. And now you kind of have to give 6 feet of clearance.
Yeah.
And it's almost like your proper orientation towards people is to be afraid of them on some deep level. And it's deeply, it's one of these things which, like, I don't know if Passover addresses that. It's like, I guess what I'm getting at is that, and this whole idea of opening the door for Elijah made me think about it. But there's one thing, and I think it's the normal thing for us to do, is to say, like, what is the purpose of Passover? Like, what is Passover trying to do? And then let's see if we can figure out a way to help Passover do what Passover is trying to do this year, even though a lot of its usual toolbox isn't available. And we were even saying, and maybe it wasn't even doing it so well anyway, so this is a chance for it to improve its capacity to do what it's trying to do. But the other way to look at it is, what do we need today? What do we need help with? And then the question is, like, can Passover do that? So I kind of think that as I'm reflecting on that, like, one of the things that I need help with this year is not internalizing this sense about other people that there's something to be afraid of, and even though I have to keep distance from them for the next few months. So is there any way maybe that Passover somehow can be modified, or is there something, I mean, I guess I'm also wondering, like, is it possible that this is how holidays get made? Is it possible that at these junctures in human history, when there's a new set of needs that human beings have, that's we know that the Jewish holidays have changed over time. We know that Passover used to be a barley harvest holiday, and then somehow it became the Egyptian freedom holiday, or it was the New Year first, and then it became the Egyptian, the freedom holiday. And like, maybe this is a moment for Passover to change some of its stripes and to say, well, maybe it could become the love of humanity holiday in a time where we actually can't be with human. I don't know. Is there, does that take you anywhere? Is there a way to explore that on Zoom?
One of the things I'm hearing is that the message that you want to carry, or one of the messages and insights that Pesach brings you this year is not to be afraid of the people, the way that we are all connected. We are all human. As if that was the message that Eliyahu Hanavi would bring to you.
Mm.
And I think that all of us as individuals, right, we're going through this as an earth, as a planet, and that each of us is needing an individualized message. And I do think that there's a lot still here in the Pesach, in the Seder technology, that lets us hear the message that each person might be needing. What I think is possible this year is to strip away some of the ways that we've been using this technology, to return to picking up the pieces. And I think you talk about the connective tissue, to putting these pieces together in ways that actually serve us, so that there isn't a single message out there that we're all meant to take away for Pesach. But how do we share in this experience of Pesach together to hear the thing that we need to be hearing?
I mean, that's very beautiful and profound. I think as what's on my mind is like, my mind is racing now. I'm thinking like, oh, if I only had 2 more weeks between now and Passover, I think I know what I would try to do, which is that I would try to recruit some technology genius to create a way that people could like randomly be assigned Seders. So that, right, because what I'm saying is that I'm thinking about how this is a time when we're almost being forced to be afraid of people and to be as unfriendly as we can. And even with our loved ones, we're only able to be with them through a screen. And is there a way that we could make this, like, turn it on its head and make this the holiday of the greatest closeness? And I was thinking like, maybe, to strangers, right? And I was thinking like, maybe if, and it is a tradition to have strangers that, or, people at your Passover Seder that are not your best friends, that are just, I mean, there is a thing that we say, all who are hungry, come and eat, and we can't actually say all who are hungry, come and eat, but we could say all who want to have a Seder with someone else, like, come to our Seder. And it seems like to me like it'd be cool to set up a bunch of laptops and random people would appear at your Seder, and you would just kind of have a chance to find something in common with random people.
I think that would be fascinating, right? Can you imagine unpacking the Exodus story with people who you were just meeting,
right,
and what we might discover about each other?
Right. So, I just, I mean, I think that it feels to me like this is an opportunity. I mean, there's what, 5 or so days between now and the first Seder, and 6 days, 5 days, whatever. And I just wonder if there would be, it's like, if you imagine that people could sit down for, an hour or two and do a little research about, what are some of the themes of Passover that they may not ever have really known, because just sitting around and going around the Haggadah, you only get a limited view of it, and just say like, gee, which of these, I would actually say, like, I would note for this that one of my theories has always been that the Haggadah is meant to be a reference book. It's meant to be a book that you read before the Seder to prepare, and then you come to the Seder and you don't use a Haggadah. And I wonder if this year it would be interesting to use it that way, and to say, like, for example, this thing about all who are hungry, come and eat. We said that, but it always kind of washed over me before. And now, of course, nobody who's hungry can come and eat, but can we make meaning of this? And it feels like there's and even if you take one or two things and you say, I'm going to find a way to make more meaning of this than I usually do, it feels like you might be able to get somewhere kind of cool and make something happen that may be new to you and exciting.
Yeah, very much so. Right. Once again, we can pick specific parts of the traditional Seder and unpack them in a slow and deliberate looking sort of way. Or I think we could pick I'm not sure what the right word is, but pick a lens and bring that to the Seder. And maybe the lens that that you're looking for this year is connectiveness or connection. But maybe somebody else is looking at courage. And I think a lot about courage right now and what it takes to be a leader in this time and what it takes to be a leader just in the day-to-day of how we run our lives. Being the person who is, the first of your group of friends to say, hey, let's not go to the store right now because the people who just got their food stamps, they get to use them right now. They get to use them and we'll be okay. Thank goodness. And, or what if your lens was about listening, power, right? And bringing that to the Seder changes. It changes how we sit together. It changes how we think about what we're, what's in the book in front of us, and also what we might be able to find in that story.
Yeah. Well, that's a good place to end this hour. I think this has been a really fruitful and provocative conversation. I hope I was trying to model a little bit how to sort of take in some of the ideas that you're sharing and make them concrete and take this as a chance to experiment and to have a bit of an adventure and not to focus on the loss, but to focus on the opportunity to try some new things that might stick with us. I've been thinking a lot about the idea that, again, something that I think a lot of us aren't really taught, and sometimes you only realize it after a long time, if ever, but that the story that the Haggadah tells is actually not the story of the Exodus. The story that the Haggadah tells is the story of the first Seder, the first rabbis who got together to tell the story of the Exodus. And if you read the Haggadah that way, you'll see it. That's why there are all these like crazy interpretations and everything. It's because that was the very first Seder, and these brilliant rabbis were saying, well, what about this idea that it wasn't only one plague, or it wasn't 10 plagues, it was 50 plagues because it says God's hand, and the hand has 5 fingers. Like, no, it wasn't 50, it was 150, and it feels like this might be one of those Seders for the ages, like this has the potential to be the year where people tell about the year that we retold the story, if we're willing to accept that challenge. And so I'm grateful to you for helping us start to frame those ways to think about it.
It has been fabulous to talk with you, and I can't wait to hear about what people try out and what it's like.
Right. And so if you do, send them our way, because I was just thinking that we would love to have some conversations after Passover with folks to find out what they actually did that was interesting and new. So thanks, Rebecca. Thank you so much for being with us. Rebecca Milder, the founding director of the Jewish Enrichment Center, which I personally believe will be the central thinker about education for the next period of Judaism. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Dan.